the railroad bridge opened about 1910. It was referred to as the St. John's Bridge before the actual bridge was built in 1931, or over 1931. Of course, St. John's was a city of its own from 1902 to 1915, when the voters of St. John's and the city of Portland voted to be absorbed in the city of Portland. Simultaneously, the city of Linton was absorbed into the city of Portland as well. So after the rise, we're coming up on North Lombard, just east of Buchanan. We've got probably the two older family-owned businesses in St. John's now. You've got E&M Plumbing. Her parents started that appliance place, and then from maybe the only typewriter place in the city of Portland, right next door to it, his parents started that as well. Both began around 1956, and Ace is a Ace typewriter. Yeah. So this is the Perch Tavern. I can get when that was built, but that goes back a long time. Where Grocery Outlet is now was A&W Root Beer in the 1960s. My sister Jackie worked there as a car hop. Would have been right here. And then on the corner here was St. John's Honda Shop on North Lombard and Tyler. Both this building was the showroom, and then catty corner was the shops. This was an auto dealership way back in the day, and then it was also Roosevelt High School automotive shops later on. The names in St. John's, the street names have changed a couple of times. I can actually show you, maybe I can do that on the way back. So this is Lombard and Oswego. There's the Kung Fu Chinese restaurant. We have that in chronological order as to all the different restaurants, hamburger places that were there over the years. We're coming up on Lombard and Philadelphia, or not Philadelphia, but Richmond. So in the corner here was,
For a while.
It was a building, it's H.F. Clark building, H.F. Clark Furniture. They were there for decades and decades. And now this is Lombard and Charleston, where there's the Signal gas station. And the Signal gas station was owned by a gentleman named Hellman, Chuck Hellman. Chuck Hellman was a really good boxer. He owned that station from 1954 until 1966. And it said that the reason he stopped boxing was he met a young lady, his future wife, fell in love, and whatever religion it was, or interfered with his church, but he just quit boxing, he put his gloves away, and never boxed again. But he had that station from 54 to 1966. And we have some good photographs on him and his boxing history as well. Across the street here at 8322 North Lombard, this is Tulip Bakery. Must have been, so that was actually, this family owned that from 1951, but there was a bakery prior to that in the same location. I think we've got good pictures of that. This is one of the original buildings. See the bricks. And so then as we continue west, this is Jersey, by the way. It was also Dawson at one point. It was Jersey for a long time, and I get the date for you as to when they did the name changes. If you look on a lot of the curbs, you'll see, because it's imprinted on them. So it's engraved in the curbs as to who did the sidewalks and so forth. The streetcar came through here opened up in 1903, and so the streetcar was actually put in before these streets or sidewalks were paved. However, there's also train coming into St. John's. The train turnaround was where the U.S. Bank currently is. So as we look to the right, you have James John School, which is named after James John. We can talk more about him later. He was an advocate for education and one of the first settlers in St. John's. What's unique about this location is the playground. The playground, when you see the insignia or symbol for Roseville High School, it says 1906. So 1906 refers to this location. This was Central School, or Williams School is what they call it. So the first high school curriculum starts here. And that building later burned down. We can get the date of that. And then later on, this building was constructed of brick. You'll see a lot of school buildings constructed of brick in about 1911. So many of the school buildings were burning down that they mandated that schools be made out of brick so they wouldn't burn. So it goes 1906 here as far as the high school curriculum. And then about 1907, in a short period of time, then they moved to the old Sitten School or North School. And that's where, that is that location where it was determined to have the Roseville High School colors that exist today, which is old, gold, and black. And so that building was torn down in about about 65 or so. It was torn down. And then they built the new school in about 1950 for Sitten, and then they added on later in 1970. So anyway, so 1906, and then 1907 they moved to Sitten. 1910, James John High School is opened up. We have some great pictures of James John High School. James John High School was built on North Syracuse at Philadelphia. It's across the street from today's Traffic Division, or the old-time St. John's City Hall. All right, let me get out of this guy's way here.
My backpack stuck to my shoe.
And then you also have the side businesses, like around the corner right here was the St. John's Bowling Alley.
What? There's a bowling alley?
Yeah. It opened up in the 1940s. It was Ray's Steakhouse and Bowling Alley. I bowled there in a league in the mid 1960s.
Bob. Bob.
Place to park there. So I can drive by that if you want to.
That's okay.
Okay.
It was that building right there on the corner?
Yeah, it's on. So that would be.
What?
Is that? I think it's Kellogg. Kellogg and John.
Just holding Milo and Kipota. Just like this.
A lot of history here in these buildings. Some of these were big auto dealerships back in the day. When I was growing up, Mossberger's, or Blue Moon was Mossberger's, and then across here where these secondhand stores are was the B&C department store. On the right here was the Five and Dime, Cornet. This was Kearns for Drugs, and this was Rexall Drug Store. And there's a man shop that just closed down in January 2000, or actually it was December of 2019. They'd opened up in 1940. We're coming up on various, this is probably the most photographed portion of St. John's, Lombard and Philadelphia. On the right, the St. John's hardware store opened up in 1908. And the McGills had that until it closed down in recent years. I'm trying to figure out a place to pull over here.
We can circle the block a few times too. That's okay.
The Venetian Theater opened up in 1926 as a vaudeville theater. And it's still standing. It's a beautiful old theater, and it has a reputation of being haunted. I'm not sure who the ghost is. If you talk to the people there, they don't really have much history on it. And when I went in there, I was telling them a whole lot about it. So that originally opened up as a vaudeville theater, and it was just before the talkies or the audio movies. And so when it opened up, it had the second largest organ in the whole city of Portland. So the organ would play simultaneously as the music was going. It had an upstairs balcony, and it had, what was unique about it, it also had a crying room or a family room where the families could go and they could make more noise, still enjoy the movie, and it wouldn't disturb the other people watching the movie. It's also, what's unique about it is the access, the entryway is kind of on the corner versus, straight facing the street. Neat old building, and there were vaudeville acts in there prior to the St. John's Bridge being built. People advocating for the bridge, and they would go on there and put on shows. Across the street from the current St. John's Theater was the Multnomah Theater. I can get you information on that. That was a combination roller skating rink, and it was a bowling alley, and so they had all movies, roller skating, and bowling as well at different points. It was advertised at one point where I saw, okay, we roller skate for a while, and then we take a break and we watch a movie. And again, that was the Multnomah. And I can confirm it, or I think the same man who financed the St. John's Theater originally.
Do you want me to draw?
The history of movie theaters in St. John's is a whole nother realm. But it's kind of interesting because the McMinimum's Pub, which is located on the corner of North Ivanhoe and Richmond, that is the only thing that remains from the 1905 Lewis and Clark exposition that was featured in 1905 in Northwest Portland, Giles Lake area. And the idea was to attract people to Portland, and it worked. So at the they actually showed movies in there. Okay, really new. Movies were new, So when they moved that, brought it down on the river by barge, they placed it there in that location at Ivanhoe and Richmond. They played movie theaters. So that's the very first movie to be played in St. John's. And fortunately, McMinimum's picked that up, and they're about preserving the history there, and I appreciate that. We're parked right now on Lombard and Baltimore. Off to the right is Jower's shoe store, or clothing store. They were Chinese. Keep in mind, Chinese were very much discriminated against over the years. So keep in mind, the Lewis and Clark exposition takes place in 1905, and Juan Jower had a store originally downtown. Rent was too high, and he sees a future here in St. John's. So he opens this store here. I have photographs of this with horses and buggies out in front of it. Juan Jower, he had 4 sons, and like a lot of the old-time businesses, the families would live up above. And so once they had 4 boys, it became too crowded. So then decided to build a home just around the corner here on North Kellogg. And then that was the family home just around the corner from their store. So there was a Chinese Exclusion Act where you're not supposed to employ any Chinese from about 1882 to about 1943. So it was against the law to employ Chinese. There was discrimination against the Chinese. But Juan Jower didn't employ any Chinese. They owned the store. And so keep in mind, throughout the years, as this was an industrial community with the shipyards and Portland Wool Mill and so forth, people needed clothing, work clothes. So Jower's shoe store provided that. And during difficult times, they almost lost their business because he would, tell people to pay on terms and that kind of thing, and they'd still have their clothes. But they came through that, and World War II happens, and the shipyard, they're building the ship industry here, building ships and so forth, and they thrive. So they were open for 100 years. Started by Marilyn Jower. His son took it over, Henry Jower. Henry Jowler, class of 1916 at Jamestown High School. He went to the University of Oregon, got an engineering degree, but according to his granddaughter, no one wanted to employ as a Chinese-American engineer. So he took it over, and then Henry's daughter, Marilyn Jowler, took it over and intentionally kept it open until 2006, which meant that it was open for 100 years, from 1906 to 2006. So across from Jowler's, we have the Wishing Well. Wishing Well was built in about 1948, and it's Chinese-American food. What Willie Nelson actually played at the Wishing Well in 1956. He was in the area. He was a disc jockey, I think maybe a bouncer too, like in Vancouver, but he was playing the area, and so he played at the Wishing Well. And if you go into Peninsula Station, there's a photograph there of Willie Nelson playing at the Wishing Well. So, and again, if you look in the curves here, you'll see when it was originally a city, you'll see, like in front of the St. John's Theater, you'll see Jersey. You'll see Jersey. And then in different parts, go ahead.